What if I told you every Five Nights at Freddy's game had the same protagonist? Behind every fake name, every hidden mission, one person was at each location trying his best to survive. Well, a lot of people think that very same thought, but if you're new to the franchise or just need a refresher, why is that? I think it's past due we go through all the lore we have about Michael Afton, set apart what's definitive lore, what's speculation, and what my thoughts are on his personal timeline. Slices, put on your aprons and let's bake ourselves a theory. And real quick, I just want to address something. I've done a lot of these and I hear some people saying, we know this stuff, why are you covering it? Twofold. One, we got no FNAF news, I gotta eat. But two, there's new people coming to this franchise all the time, and I figured videos like this would be helpful to old and new fans to get a refresher on what is concrete lore and what is fan speculation, because the waters get muddy over the decade-long franchise this is. Regardless, how do we even know Michael Afton exists? Compared to other characters in the franchise, we actually have a pretty easy time figuring out whether or not Michael Afton exists, because he introduces himself in his first ever monologue. At the end of Sister Location, if you beat the custom night, you get this line.
Father, it's me, Michael.
Because that alone tells us so much. Father is likely referring to Mr. Afton from the beginning of the same game, and Michael, so Michael Afton. Clear as day. And from this monologue, we know that he's the protagonist of Sister Location, that the Scooper ending is the canon one, and that after Sister Location, he's hunting down William Afton. And that's a lot. We also know that he was sent down here under the direction to put her back together. Likely the little girl inside of Circus Baby, who we know from this video is Elizabeth Afton. And that's a lot. Again, this is just the first game he speaks in. But from there, and now that we know he exists, what else can we know definitively about him? Well, if we look at FNAF 4, and we know that he's the son of William Afton, and we're pretty certain the crying child is the son of William Afton, that all but confirms this older brother in a foxy mask to be Michael Afton. So we know that he bullied his younger brother to the point of accidentally killing him in the bite of 83. Some people also speculate that he is the protagonist of the Nightmare gameplay of FNAF 4, but we'll save that for speculation. For now, we know nearly definitively that he's the older brother in the FNAF 4 minigames. Where else are we fairly certain he shows up? Now, it is a bit more speculative, but it is fairly definitive that Michael Afton is the protagonist of FNAF 3, for several reasons. Some of the looser evidence is that in the survival logbook, Foxy is the stand-in guard for the FNAF 3 location, Foxy being related to Michael Afton because of the mask thing. Some stronger evidence is that all of the phantoms are animatronics Michael Afton would have seen, so if it's hallucinations, that makes sense. And even if it's some weird agony projection from William Afton, it would still make sense to be basing off of the memories of Michael. But frankly, I think the strongest evidence is that monologue we touched on from Sister Location, because it's not just any backdrop. During the monologue, we see the charred and burned down remains of Fazbear Frights, the haunted house of FNAF 3, and at the very end, a burnt Springtrap gets up out of the rubble. We also know that in FNAF 3, according to the last newspaper, the haunted house burns down at the end of the week of Michael working there. So, piecing this together, it seems very likely that Michael Afton, after saying, "I'm going to come find you," eventually found Fazbear Frights, a haunted house collecting memorabilia of Fazbear, and stuck around to see if his dad would show up. And son of a bitch, he did. And once he confirmed that Springtrap was in fact the corpse of his late father, William Afton, and was in fact alive, then he attempted to burn the whole place down to get rid of him. So it seems fairly definitive that Michael Afton is the protagonist of FNAF 3. And it's barely evidence, so I didn't want to mention it, but I should mention that some people also think that it's Michael because of the jump scares of FNAF 3. The fact that Springtrap doesn't necessarily attack you, but just looks at you real aggressively. Some people argue that's on purpose because William Afton is shocked to see Michael Afton in the flesh, but I think that's a post-hoc justification for an admittedly bad jump scare. Now, some people argue that the protagonist of FNAF 3 isn't Michael Afton, but instead this guy named Hudson from Fazbear Frights. I don't think there's a lot of water for this theory. The only evidence is that there's a story that seems a lot like FNAF 3 that has the character named Hudson being the night guard. But everything else is really weird about it. It just doesn't line up well. So I think the evidence here pretty definitively points us to Michael Afton being the protagonist for FNAF 3 and trying to light the building on fire to kill William Afton for good, which of course doesn't work. But what if he tried again? That's a lot better. So, like I said, it's not like anything is gonna change. Where's all the furniture? Okay, well, here's hoping the doors are at least the same. Oh, there's a sponsor. This message is sponsored by Raycon. Mother's Day is right around the corner, so it's a great time to find a gift that actually fits into your mom's everyday life. My wife is a stay-at-home mother of 3, and it's her kick-ass momming that gives me any time to do any of this. She works so hard, and the perfect gift for her to ease some of that work is Raycon's Essential Open Earbuds. You heard me, open ear. Look at this. You can listen to your music or podcasts while being able to hear everything around you, which for a mom with toddlers is essential. You need to hear the messes before they happen. They're also really light with a rotating hook, so they really stay in. She's been taking them with her when she goes for her run with absolutely no issues. And they last the whole time with 8 hours of playtime and 36 hours of battery with the charging case. Honestly, they are so good that even though I got them as a present for her, I gotta get a second pair for myself. I am obsessed with them. But they're already a part of her daily routine, so I'm not gonna take them back. Luckily, Raycon makes it pretty easy to get my second pair because they are half the price of the other expensive brands, with sound quality that's just as good. Celebrate the moms in your life. Click the link in the description box or go to buyraycon.com/rytoastopen to get 15% off the Essential Open Earbuds and support the channel while you're at it. Thanks to Raycon for sponsoring today's video. Well, at least I'll be able to know if something's sneaking up behind me while listening to something. Alright, well, let's keep trying these doors. The protagonist for FNAF 6, Pizzeria Simulator, is definitely up for debate, but I think the evidence here nearly definitively points us to Michael Afton. And that's mainly from this line from Henry.
And to you, my brave volunteer, who somehow found this job listing not intended for you. Although there was a way out planned for you, I have a feeling that's not what you want. I have a feeling that you are right where you want to be.
Now, some people take this line to argue that the protagonist is anybody except Michael Afton. The argument being that Henry Emily intended Michael Afton to be here, so this job listing was not intended for our player character. But I don't think that holds up because of the second half of the line. There was an exit intended for you, but I have a feeling that's not what you want. I have a feeling you're right where you want to be. Let's walk through the logic here for a moment. If this was intended for a random bystander to accept the job, why would he assume the random bystander would want to die with the franchise? Whereas, if he was planning this for Michael, why would he plan an escape route for Michael? Surely he would assume Michael Afton wants to go down with the ship at this point. I think it makes much more sense that he planned this job listing for anybody willing to do the work, someone who could help with this. And because they were an innocent bystander to the Fazbear tragedies, an exit was planned for the intended volunteer. But throughout the week, Henry Emily realizes that somehow Michael Afton is alive and he's the willing volunteer. That's why he didn't intend this job listing to be for Michael. He probably thought he was dead, especially if he had his hands on any material from Sister Location, and we know he got blueprints from that bunker. If he saw footage on a security camera or something of him being scooped, of course he'd assume Michael's dead. So all of a sudden he's back and he's like, I didn't intend for you to be here, but if you want to die with us, you're welcome to. That makes sense. And if this protagonist is Michael Afton, FNAF 6 is where his story mostly ends. He realizes that Henry Emily is trying to gather everyone related to Fazbear and burn it all to the ground, and he wants to participate in that. He wants to help end this thing that should have ended years ago. And once everyone has been collected, he, like Henry, recognizes that he needs to go down with the ship too for this to truly be over. And he can finally be at rest. Kind of. Now we're about to move on to speculation, so I'm going to already dip my toes in the speculation of this game. And specifically, 2 parts of this game. Well, one part of this game and one part of the games attached to this game. The part of this game I think is speculation, but I do agree with, is that Midnight Motorist, the minigame where a guy comes home in a purple car, bangs on a door, his son escaped through a broken window, and some person on the couch was like, leave him alone. I think that minigame is depicting William Afton, Mrs. Afton, and Michael Afton. Essentially, I think that Michael Afton is the runaway, someone breaking out of a window to get out of this house to go to that place again. That place being either the crying child's grave or the nearby lake. How do we know there's a nearby lake? It's speculation, but Fall Fest is often depicted next to a lake surrounded by trees. And I've in the past linked that up to the Old Man Consequences Lake, which is a lake surrounded by trees. And that being said, some further speculation on Michael Afton I'm quite fond of that I expound in this video is I believe Old Man Consequences is Michael Afton. the Old Man Consequences from FNAF World and Ultimate Custom Night. The reason I think so is multifaceted. First of all, the sprite. This always looked like a weird alligator man. It never made total sense. But this face does in a way look like a pixel art representation of a Foxy mask, something that would make a lot of sense for Michael Afton. But secondly, narratively speaking, this makes a lot of sense to be Michael Afton. Think about where he is at the end of FNAF 6. He's finally helped everybody burn, but in the back of his mind, his brother and his sister were failed by him. He tried to put her back together, but obviously he failed. Look at Scrap Baby. And he was the one that led to the crying child's death. If Michael Afton had any agency as he's moving on, the idea that he would want to make sure that the crying child and Elizabeth moved on as well makes perfect sense. So imagine him as Old Man Consequences, just on the edge of the afterlife, in the in-between of whatever FNAF World and Ultimate Custom Night are, and the other side, waiting there by his favorite spot for his brother and sister to arrive. When he sees the vengeful spirit pass by, he warns the vengeful spirit, hey, it's not worth it. We've won. Let him be, and you should rest. Because that's all he wants at the end of the day. Especially considering the drowning ending in FNAF World. If you enter Old Man Consequences Lake, you're met with this image. This image has not made a lot of sense and has a lot of interpretations, but I like to see it as three silhouettes watching TV. Michael Afton in the middle, an arm around his younger brother and younger sister. He may have failed them in life, but in the afterlife, they can be a happy family again. They can have each other doing what Michael Afton loves most, watching TV. I think that's a sweet ending for him, and it's speculative, but I think it makes logical sense. And it's not the only speculation we have on Michael Afton, because there's arguments to be made that he's not only the protagonist of Sister Location and 6 and 3, but possibly 1, 2, and 4 as well. We've already discussed how Mike is likely the older brother in the minigames of FNAF 4, but what if I told you he's also the one having the nightmares? Now I know on the surface it does make the most sense for the crying child to be the one having these nightmares, but there's 2 points of evidence that I think lean more towards Michael Afton. One, the layout of the animatronic attacks is eerily similar to FNAF 1, and most damning, the FNAF 1 Night 1 phone call can be heard in reverse during one of the nights of FNAF 4, which doesn't make any sense if this is the crying child. Sure, it's a nightmare. We can excuse a FNAF 1 phone call randomly playing in a house, but for it to be in someone's nightmares, they would have had to heard it. And the crying child never worked at Freddy Fazbear's Pizza. He died when he was like 5, but Michael Afton likely did. So then how do we explain this? Is this just nightmares that Michael Afton is having? Well then why does the crying child have such similar nightmares? This is unfortunately when we get into the hallucinogenic gas possibility of it all. One of the Tales in the Pizzaplex stories is called Didophobia, and it shows us essentially another angle of something that smells a lot like FNAF 4. A kid named Rory is trapped in this barren testing chamber with mannequins on sticks that come at him every night, and it's constantly being filled with hallucinogenic gas to make everything seem real. His entire life is waking up, wandering around his house a little dazed and confused and somewhat tired, and then giving up and going back to bed. Then having a horrific nightmare that's identical to FNAF 4. And we learn in this story that this chamber is attached to the Sister Location bunker. Now, this is an insane story, and I don't think this story exists in the games, but a chamber like this does make sense to, unfortunately. And that's mainly because of the private office in Sister Location, where in it we see these screens of the FNAF 4 location. One that's different from the house we see in the daytime minigames. Not to mention that on the Fuse map, we see this and this, which are both layouts from FNAF 4. So it seems like these games are suggesting that Sister Location Bunker and the FNAF 4 location are connected in some way. So if these chambers do exist, well, I think that might explain these similar nightmares. My thinking is that if these chambers existed before the death of the crying child, that William Afton may have taken Michael Afton and put him into the chambers as punishment for what happened to the crying child. Now, to be clear, I don't think it's because William Afton cares about his kid or anything like that. Rather, I think it was William Afton angry that he embarrassed the company. I mean, the crying child, the son of William Afton, dying in the main mascot of your restaurant is a bad look on a good day. But doing this is sort of a 3 birds with 1 stone situation. If he's the Midnight Motorist escapee, the kid who keeps running away, then this would keep him contained. He's also a perfect test subject because no one's going to check up on him because it's his son. There's no one to report him missing. And thirdly, it's petty revenge for what happened at the business. And so if Michael Afton was being put in these nightmare chambers, then he was experiencing this torture over and over. And then even when he gets out, if he goes to the FNAF 1 location and experiences something similar in real life, the idea that his nightmares would be colored by this makes perfect sense. But if he was being put in these nightmare chambers, he'd also be incredibly manipulatable. And if so, what would William Afton manipulate Michael into doing? The main argument for him being the protagonist of 1 and 2 is the linking of the characters Mike Schmidt and Fritz Smith, two of these likely fake names who were working at the Fazbear locations. The reason they're linked is they were fired for the exact same reason: tampering with the animatronics, general unprofessionalism, odor. Now, some people attribute the odor thing to the whole walking corpse stuff, which does work, but personally, I think these events happened before Sister Location. So for me, I have a different explanation, which admittedly is very speculative, but it's based off the loose evidence we'd already talked about in FNAF 4. Think about the fact that he gets fired twice, specifically for tampering with the animatronics. I could see a very likely scenario, one that I went into in this video. The idea that William Afton was manipulating Michael Afton to essentially be his right-hand man, or his fall guy, more accurately. So in this logic, Fritz Smith and Mike Schmidt would be fake names used by Michael Afton in order to retrieve metal off of the animatronics for William Afton. In essence, Michael Afton would be part of the protagonist of FNAF 2 and the main protagonist of FNAF 1. And in essence, that would make Michael Afton the protagonist for every single Scott Games FNAF game, excluding UCN and FNAF World. Mike Schmidt in 1, Fritz Smith in FNAF 2, the player in 3, the Nightmare Haver in 4, the player in Sister Location, and the Brave Volunteer in Pizzeria Simulator. So with all this in mind, what does Michael Afton's timeline look like? Michael Afton grew to resent his little brother. Their father having no time to watch them, he was made babysitter against his will. This led to bullying, but bullying that got much, much too intense, and eventually led to the untimely death of the crying child, something that stuck to Michael Afton moving forward. In the days that followed, he'd sneak out of the house and visit his brother's grave, have long nights staring out at his favorite lake, trying to get over this grief that he never would. And eventually, William Afton's anger towards Michael grew too great. Not necessarily because he cared about the crying child, but because he embarrassed him so thoroughly in his business. A kid dying in the mouth of your star animatronic is not a good look, let alone your own kid. So that, combined with him being sick of Michael Afton running away, William Afton decides to kill two birds with one stone. He puts Michael in the Nightmare Experiment chambers. 1, now Michael can't escape, and he can keep a closer eye on him. 2, he'll have a test subject no one will follow up on. After all, it's his kid. Who knows him besides him? And 3, it's a bit of petty revenge for the embarrassment the company had to suffer under Michael Afton. Michael Afton would spend several years in these chambers, reliving this horrible nightmare scenario every day, until eventually William Afton steps in and says, "Hey, I think I can stop your nightmares. All you have to do is get a job at Freddy Fazbear's Pizza and retrieve some metal for me." But as he tries to do this, he's promptly fired. William Afton says he's failed, and it won't work, and he puts him back in the chambers. Some time goes on until William Afton tries it again, this time at a different Freddy Fazbear's, and Michael Afton swears to be more stealthy this time. He lasts an entire week at the company, but eventually is once again caught and promptly fired. William Afton needs this metal, and he has no more time to wait. So he tells Michael, "Listen, if I don't make it back, go into the bunker and put her back together." And then he goes off to collect the metal himself. The Follow Me minigames happen and William Afton dies. Enough time goes by and Michael Afton has no one coming back for him. So he goes down into the Sister Location bunker, where we see that game play through pretty normally, as we'd expect. But as Michael is going through this bunker and trying to figure out how to put Elizabeth back together, he would stumble upon the private office, the documentation on everything that has happened to him, and realize that his father wasn't trying to save him or save his siblings. His father was their tormentor, but it's too late. By the time he realizes this, he's scooped out and Ennard wears his body to escape. But a combination of his own rage towards his father and the remnant left over on that scooper put into his body, and he, once again, lives. Michael Afton now only exists to hunt down his father, seeking anywhere he might find him. Still racked with nightmares of his experiences in those chambers, Haunted by the guilt of his own brother, he vows to get William Afton. His first attempt is Fazbear's Fright, a haunted house collecting objects all based around Fazbear's. If his father would show up anywhere, it would be here. And he was right. Eventually, the suit of Spring Bonnie with the corpse of his father appears, walking around the hallways. It seems like he's not the only one who's cheated death. So he tries to burn the building down with William inside, but it doesn't work. Eventually, sometime later, he hears about a Freddy Fazbear's you can own. Anyone can own. They just have to put in the work. This can't be good. So he investigates, only to find that the subtle purpose of this is to lure in every player who remains in this story. And he immediately realizes that this is his true mission. This will end it all. And working with Henry Emily, he's able to lure in every single being still related to Fazbear and burn them all to the ground. Now he patiently waits in the afterlife until the crying child and Elizabeth find their peace too, so they can all rest together as a family again. And that is the entire timeline of Michael Afton. Let me know if you agree with it. I know the thing I probably strayed the furthest from everyone on is FNAF 4, but I genuinely think that makes sense. The other explanation is that in one of the books, it's explained that when a ghost reaches out to you, it affects your dreams first. So maybe that's just the crying child reaching out to Michael. I don't know, it's up to interpretation. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. In the meantime, you should check out this video. I'm really proud of it. If you want your fan art featured on the podcast, feel free to share with #ToastArt. A huge thank you to the best channel members, the Dough Risers. And until next time, as always, stay toasty, slices.